Welcome everyone to today's Critical Thought. In honor of my return to XCOM 2, we are returning to everybody's favorite term when it comes to abstraction, probability. The makers of kings and the downfalls of many players. Probability has become a foundation in any game built on abstraction-based game design. From RPGs, strategy games, even just about any game that features an RPG-based system, there can be some level of probability. In some cases, it can be as small as plus 1.5% chance to light your enemy on fire, to something big like the chance to hit or miss on an enemy. And when it comes to probability, it can certainly lead to some heated arguments. And it's also a very interesting element to build a game around due to the psychological factor of it. Because one thing that gamers like to do, what a lot of people like to do, is to build patterns. If I do X and Y happens, then I will associate the two. So if a game says that I have a 90% chance to hit, for a lot of people they associate that being a guarantee. But the challenge when it comes to probability is the fact that it is up in the air. And as anyone who's played any strategy game will tell you, or any game from XCOM will tell you, 99% doesn't equal 100. And one of the issues of probability is that conception of when it's being skewed against the player. Because 50-50 doesn't necessarily mean that every other time something's going to work. We have seen many games where 50% chance to hit, you'll miss 5 times in a row, and then you'll hit on that 35% chance. And the more probability has an impact on success or failure in a game, the harder it is to get people or keep people from just outright exploding at their game. As I said a few minutes ago, smaller examples of probability can be something as simple as additional damage, a critical hit, maybe life drain effects, stuff like that. And when that happens, it's not a big deal. It's a nice surprise if it does, and it's like shrug your shoulders when it doesn't. But when you're playing a game like XCOM, when 4 or 3 of your 4 squads are about to be killed, you have one shot to stop this mutant from getting a critical hit, and you miss, it can drive people up the wall, or up a wall. Same goes for something like the Darkest Dungeon. And for a lot of people, this can be that straw that breaks the camel's back. Because probability, like abstraction itself, is not in the player's hands. You can modify probability, which we'll come back to in a few minutes. You can move into a good spot and maybe have a 70% chance instead of 60. But at the end of the day, it's all based on the dice roll or whatever formula the game uses that's behind the scenes. And because probability is not easily shown and understood, it can lead into those situations where the player just feels like the game is out to get them. Like I said, I have missed 85% up chances playing XCOM, and the same goes for Darkest Dungeon as well. And when that happens, it can basically feel like the game is, and everyone's favorite term, is cheating against the player. And like I said, the more pronounced probability is, the more polarizing it becomes. A go-to example that I like to talk about whenever we bring up probability in games is the, I guess, board game-esque survival game Tharsis from about, I think it was, 2015 or 2016. In that game, every round that goes by, you are inflicted with random ailments on your ship that you must solve or suffer a per malady downside or punishment. And your success rate is all dictated by dice rolls as well. So it's a game that is basically probability on top of probability to decide whether you win or lose. And this again can make things very tough because it not only will affect the perception of difficulty, but it can affect difficulty itself. For instance, in Darkest Dungeon, if I roll 4 or 5 critical hits in a row on a boss fight, I'm going to have a very easy time fighting that guy. On the other hand, if I miss 5 or 6 attacks in a row, it's going to feel like this guy's just outright breaking the game. And with titles like XCOM and even Darkest Dungeon as well, this can become compounded by a negative feedback loop of I start missing, enemy gets those hits, I start losing my squaddies, I don't have characters to upgrade, it becomes harder for the next match and subsequent matches and so on, and basically one bad turn can basically lead to entire ruin. And that was one of the big issues with Tharsis. Due to how the different incidents will carry over from round to round, you get a very bad round 1, and you might as well just restart, because you're going to be so far in the hole that it's going to be very hard to crawl out of. And that is, like I said, a very common issue of games built on probability and taking the control out of the player's hands. Now, with that said, though, it's important to talk about how you mitigate or control probability, because this is a major part of its design. For games like Darkest Dungeon and XCOM, advanced players know how to tilt the scales in their favor. In XCOM 2, for instance, getting flanking shots, higher elevation, knowing when to attack, when to hunker down, when to move. In the Darkest Dungeon, there are skills that can raise your to-hit chance, lower your enemy's dodge chance, and so on. So a lot of the mysteries of probability can be revealed or removed once you understand how the game is played. But getting the player to that point is very difficult. And it goes back to what I was saying a few minutes ago. When it comes to probability in video games, one of the biggest problems when it comes to conveying the information is the fact that it's completely random. And it's very hard for the player to understand anything more than pass or fail, or hit and miss. For instance, in Darkest Dungeon, having a 60% chance or a 70% chance doesn't really mean much when all I see is I hit the enemy, or I missed the enemy. And it's very important as a game designer, when you're building your game around probability, to show as much information as you can to teach the player about what's going on. Why is this enemy only have a 20% chance to hit, but this one next to him has 50? Why are these attacks having a greater chance to crit? Why can this enemy hit me? And being able to show that information allows the player to start building up the knowledge base in their heads about how these systems work, and hopefully to get them to that point when the mysteries of probability are kind of revealed. And you can see that, for instance, with XCOM. When you're watching expert level plays, like some of the people I watched was like Christopher Odd, Beagle Rush, and I think probably one other, they are playing the same games as we are. Despite the fact that it may seem like they are getting incredibly lucky, probability for them is still the same as probability for us. But how you react and plan around probability is the differing factor. And as we've talked about when it comes to teaching a player about game design, about how your systems work, it is crucial to give the player the information they need to start putting these things together. One of the things I think kind of hurts XCOM and XCOM 2 is that I don't think the game does a good enough job to convey to the player how to get around or mitigate probability. It will tell you about flanking and, of course, not standing out in broad daylight, but in terms of some of the more complex elements, like knowing when to hunker down, knowing that, let's say this is the wall, instead of standing on either side of it, you stand directly in the middle, and therefore the enemy cannot get a shot at all and forces them to move out of their normal position. And being able to start to put these connections together is a very important skill for playing these games. It's the difference between someone saying, this game is cheating, versus, I'm not doing it right. And getting someone to admit that is very difficult. because you can pick any game on Steam that has probability in it, and chances are there will be at least 2 or 3 threads of people saying, your game's broken, enemies are hitting me every time, I can't hit them, what the hell is going on, this game is broken, and so on and so forth. But the reason why probability is used is because it is the great equalizer. Because it can affect everything and anything in your game, and it creates that excitement. Raise your hand if you've played any of the XCOM games where success or failure came down to literally 150 or less shot to save a character. Or when you're just trying to get that perfect hit on an enemy to complete the mission or get through a terror mission. And the same goes for the Darkest Dungeon. Who here hasn't had that lucky hit that managed to make an incredibly hard fight go very well? Or on the other hand, a fight to start going downhill fast when the boss gets a critical hit on his AoE attack. The beauty of probability and why it's used so much is that it keeps the player guessing. If everything was 100% chance to hit, it robs the game of a lot of that uncertainty, and it makes things very predictable. And you don't want predictability in any kind of strategy or critical thought-based game because it's going to make things boring. Now, with that said, though, I'm going to throw things over to you folks watching. What do you think about games built on probability? Are you a fan of them? Chances are, for some of my regulars, especially those who like the Darkest Dungeon, I think we already know the answer to it. But to throw in a little added wrinkle to it, is there a point, in your opinion, that probability goes too far? That one time when it feels like basically the entire game hinges on one flip of a coin, and that could mean the difference of a successful play or hours of gameplay loss. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and for designers watching this, what are your thoughts on probability, and have you built any games on probability-based systems, and how did you balance it? For instance, in XCOM 2, it has been famously reported that despite whatever that probability rating is, the game will lie based on how many misses you've had previously. So there's essentially a weighted average or a weighted bonus if you miss your last 3-4 shots. Which, for someone like me, where probability can screw them really bad, it's great. But that last point is where we'll end things on here. Because ultimately, probability, like I said, is the great equalizer. And it makes it very hard to balance your game. Because you will have people who will say, your game is ridiculously easy. I beat it on my first try. Every battle was just a cakewalk. Your game sucks. Then you'll have people who say, your game is too difficult. Every battle, I missed every shot. Every enemy got their crits off. None of my abilities connected. Your game's broken. It sucks. And unfortunately, that is the great rub when it comes to probability in game design. Because you will have both those situations. No matter how much you balance your systems, no matter how much you fine-tune your game engine, you will have someone who will get every positive roll, and then you'll have someone like me who gets every negative roll. Such as my famous one playing XCOM Enemy Unknown when I missed a 95% chance in point-blank range with a shotgun. After that happened, I'm pretty sure Jake Solomon just started laughing uncontrollably wherever he was at that time. But let's wrap things up here. Thank you so much for watching today's Critical Thought. If you're new, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Let me know if there's any other topics you'd like me to cover in upcoming vlogs. Be sure to check out our Patreon, and come back daily for more design discussions here and on GameWisdom.com, where we examine the art and science of games. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and come back nightly around 10 Eastern for regular game streams. For a collection of my writings as well as weekly podcasts on game design topics, be sure to check out game-wisdom.com. You can follow me on Twitter at GWBycer for updates from me throughout the day. And Be sure to check out our Patreon campaign and find us on Patreon under GW Bycer for ways to not only support Game Wisdom, but you can get access to our Discord channel where we'll talk game design topics, as well as allow you to vote for our Saturday night grab bag stream. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoy the next video here on the Game Wisdom YouTube channel.